Hello, and welcome to the Dolby Institute podcast. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you will find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Today, we are discussing the sound of Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. And appropriately, we are speaking with the two-time Academy Award-winning director himself and his co-director, Mark Gustafson. Joining the discussion is sound supervisor Scott Gershon, along with re-recording mixers Frank Montano and John Taylor, the latter of whom you may remember from our episode on Bardo from earlier this week. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is currently available on Netflix. And as always, we will have a link for you in our show notes. If you haven't seen it yet, I really suggest that you do. It's an absolute delight, although it is a dark delight, as you will hear from our conversation. But then again, we are talking about a Guillermo del Toro film after all.
Ciao, Papa.
Wait.
Time has come to say farewell. For how long will I go? Is it far? No one knows, no one can tell.
And that's where I wanted to start the conversation with Guillermo. So I asked him about his decision to set the story during the rise of Mussolini and fascist Italy between the two world wars, and what he wanted to impart to the audience with that choice.
Well, it's not about imparting. It's about really telling a story about a puppet that doesn't behave like a puppet in a time where everybody does, and to talk about truth and lies in a way that is a lot more deep than saying I didn't eat my soup today, in a time where the biggest lie is having people think that they are a superior race, or they are entitled to dominate the world, or that they together can vanquish anyone and they're better than someone, etc., etc. I mean, those are the big lies. And more importantly, the lies about you being obedient and folding into the agenda of a state is a quality, which it isn't. And disobedience with a conscience is perfect for that setting, and Pinocchio in our version is disobedient and an individual, but an individual of generous spirit. He sacrifices himself for others, but he is himself. He doesn't simply obey, and he's faced with great punishment if he does, and he still does it.
So I understand that stop motion animation was one of your first loves as a child, and that you actually, I think my understanding was one of your first movies you started to make as a stop motion, but then there was a sort of an unfortunate theft and that prevented you from doing it.
Yeah, they actually broke into. I mean, we had none of this, all these puppets and sets and all that, and we were shooting, and there's a few photographs. Like 20 photographs of our little sets and collection of puppets. They destroyed all of them and then proceeded to poop and pee on the floor, which I always think is a great preparation for work in Hollywood.
All right. Well, I think we could just stop the interview right there, because we got our soundbite and we're ready to go. Thank you, Guillermo. So obviously, Guillermo, stop motion is very near and dear to your heart. And I can't think of a more perfect story to tell using this form. Can you talk about finding Mark and how you guys collaborated on telling the story?
Well, myself, I've known Mark and his work for a long, long time, not to make him feel as ancient as he is, but we've known each other. I've known his work for a long time. In fact, the Will Binton Productions was, for my partner and I, hugely important, because we worked on clay. We used to make armatures out of wood and resin and wire, and the skins were clay. And we always were looking at the way the clay was manipulated in the Binton movies. And there is a quality huge jump with Mark in charge of the movies, or when he joins the company. I think that just everything, animation, conception, execution, becomes phenomenal. And then his work on his own, whether he was working with Walter Murch on a sequence in Return to Oz, or he was animating Fantastic Mr. Fox, he's phenomenal. And not only, and this is very important for me to say, and I've been saying it again and again, this is not a director calling a guy to direct animation. The partnership was deep, and we made decisions narratively and syntactically and the way we wanted to tell the story together. This is not just his acumen as an animator, but as a director. So I called him and I said, would you be interested? I think at the time he was unemployed, so he hastily accepted, only to regret it. Yes, only to regret it over many, many times.
Mark, can you fill in your part of the story for us, and what attracted you to this particular project and working with Guillermo?
Well, it was work. I mean, I was obviously aware of Guillermo's filmography, and when you get a chance to work with someone of his caliber, you take it. And I think our sensibilities were very much in line, so that was great. It was wonderful to find someone who really saw things the same way that I did, and who had he could protect us. He could protect the project. Because of what he had done in his career, he had earned that right to say no to whoever was giving us notes, and we could make this thing, a little bit more purely from our point of view, without interference. So that was great. I mean, those kind of opportunities don't come along very often. So I will always be grateful to Guillermo for that. And slightly bitter for reasons that I won't go into right now.
I can't help being more handsome than you, man. We had this discussion. This discussion, Mark. Put it to bed.
Mark, can you?
I have to be known as a sexy one. We agreed on that.
Can you talk a little bit about putting the actual production together? I noticed you worked with McKinnon and Saunders on this. I was part of the original team on Tim Burton's Mars Attacks back when that was a stop motion film. And so I got to work with those guys, and it was just such a pleasure and a joy.
We wanted the best, and we wanted the best in terms of the animators. We wanted sort of go to the best company to the creation of the puppets, and we were able to get them. I mean, they are the real life Geppettos, don't you think, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a small world too. I mean, I almost worked on Mars Attacks, and it was like, it came right up to it, and I turned it down for reasons which I won't go into right now, but then the whole thing collapsed and became CG. But that was my real introduction to McKinnon Saunders, and those guys are immensely talented. And so it only made sense for us to take advantage of them when we went into this project.
And stop motion attracts people that have almost a religious dedication to it. And I mean, it is in many ways that, because whether you're doing cinematography like Frank, or you're creating puppets, or you're animating, it's always the same carnival. Ultimately, it's a very hidebound society of people that believe in an art form that is we are. And it's impractical, and the studios don't like it. It takes too long. It's too difficult, but it's the most staggering, heartbreaking, beautiful form of animation in my book.
I'd like to talk to you about the character design of Pinocchio, because I think I can't imagine that you could have come up with a design for the character of Pinocchio that would have been more of a gift for sound and for sound design than the one that you ended up with. Just in terms of his mechanicalness and his joints and the way you designed that character was such a gift for Scott and the sound team. Can you talk a little bit about, were you thinking about that as you were thinking about the character design, or how did that come together?
Absolutely, I was not thinking about Scott. I tried to avoid it until it's absolutely inevitable. I stumbled upon the design of Chris Grimley for Pinocchio when he published his book around 2003. And, we were talking, and he said, "Oh, wouldn't it be great?" I was talking about, I wanted to make a Pinocchio movie. I said, "Oh, I would like to make a Pinocchio movie." I said, "I have mine, and I'll produce yours, and we'll use your design." And as it started to progressing, he kept his design pretty intact. And eventually, when I took over as director many years later, I redesigned it with Guy Davis. But we kept this notion of something unfinished, that made of wood. One of the first things I asked Chris, very early, 2003, 2004, I said, "Why does he look like that?" And said, "Oh, Geppetto was drunk." And I thought it was a brilliant answer. And I thought, oh, he was drunk with grief. And then we took it from there, And I think if you just think about the universe of Pinocchio, it depends all on the design of Pinocchio. If you don't have a Pinocchio that feels of a peace with the world, even as an anomaly, you have sort of an uncanny valley in reverse. Nothing seems real.
Scott, maybe this is a great point for you to come in and talk about the sound design of Pinocchio and how you took the steps to bring that particular character design to life.
Guillermo and I spoke the August before, and we were just talking, just throwing around some ideas. We were talking about collecting puppets from old vintage puppets. And at that point, there was a lot of storyboards that it was cutting against. So, we started collecting puppets, but puppets are very dense. They're like almost bowling pins sometimes. So it started having a hardness to it. So that sort of wasn't working. Then little by little, I started seeing from storyboards to visuals, and I started seeing all of the bolts and the nuts and the nails and sticking out. And then we were like, hey, wait a second, let me try different wood. And he was starting to look loose. So then we started looking for looser woods. I contacted a guitar company to get me guitar wood that had really great tone. So we started collecting lots of wood. And I started putting it, just let me do the normal thing, put the wood together. And we said, okay, that's very woody. And then we would start talking a little bit more. And we're like, it can maybe creak and it can maybe squeak and start giving it more of a vocabulary. So over time, as I was starting to get test visuals in, I was able to start testing it out. And even the part where Pinocchio starts coming into being, I started taking walnuts, like on the little cracking of the joints, and breaking walnuts into place to give it a really interesting sense. And through our conversation, we realized that Pinocchio needed to be very fragile at the beginning, like watching a four-legged animal just being born, and it can't find its balance all the way up until the church. And we were getting to that point where we wanted the fragility, where he looked like he was going to fall apart maybe. And then as we went from it being a thing and a creature, we started wanting to evolve away from it. And all of a sudden the personality comes out, and he evolves from being a wooden thing to being Pinocchio, the character. And we start pulling away from that part of Pinocchio where he finds the fragility. We go back to that at one point when Volpe starts just pushing him too hard and then he collapses. We show that fragility again to remind, yes, he is made of wood, but we kind of transcend that. So we went to little things where when he does the little wave in the closet, it's just a delicate little squeak. We had to find unique sounds one at a time. And we would go through hundreds and maybe even thousands of sounds. No, that's not right. Ooh, that's the right little squeak. That's the right little, and little by little. And then what I did was, because we knew that the music had lots of complexity, I built and woven together all these different elements. I brought it to the stage saying, well, look, we've got some wood, we've got some squeaks, we've got some creaks. Then with Frankie, myself, and Guillermo, as the music was playing, Guillermo would say, hey, can I get a little more squeak there? Can I listen to these? Oh, I like that element. Let's push that element. So it allowed me to set up a template and such where we can iterate on the mixing stage, push and pull, and Guillermo could have a lot of control over how it plays against music to really hone in on the sonic signature of Pinocchio.
I really appreciate you talking about that focus on his earlier moments and the different treatment for that, because that was one of the things that really struck me watching the film is how wobbly he is. I think you talked about him almost as if he's like a newborn colt.
What is this? What kind of sorcery?
You wanted me to live. You asked for me to live.
Who are you?
My name is Pinocchio. I'm your son.
What were you doing sonically to kind of give that sense of looseness of he's not really sure how to move?
We did a couple things. I did use at one point we tried the puppet. The puppet thing, it didn't work. There wasn't enough fragility. I did some Lincoln logs and I screwed them together with string. Then we took a bag of wood and just kind of manipulated a little bit. So as he moved, we could kind of do these shifts, little squeaks. I brought on a wonderful Foley artist named Dan O'Connell, and we ended up working a lot together. But a lot of it wasn't made at a single time. It was taking lots of elements. At one point, I may have had 30, 40 tracks of sounds. And then it was just like a lot of sounds. And then it was going through, hand-picking through them, a little bit here, a little bit there, stealing that, and kind of musique concrete, just kind of piecing together the little pieces to give them a rhythm, give them a personality, and basically support what the character and what Pinocchio was going through at the different stages of the film.
Talk to me a little bit about the workflow and the process. I mean, obviously, Guillermo and Mark, I presume that there were storyboards before you actually built sets and started to do the animation. But Scott, did you get involved at that point, or were you building a library of stuff to hand to Guillermo to cut in as they were animating, or kind of how did this process flow?
I reached out to Guillermo initially just to say hi and just say hi. I knew we were going to be working together, in which he then said, "So what have you got so far?" And I went, "No, I start in January." I said, "No, I think you start next week." So I went, "Oh, okay." And it was great. I mean, very rarely do we get an opportunity in films to, in some ways, fail. To do things and say, well, that a lot of times we have to do what we know works, but that's sort of what we always do. What's great about this opportunity is to really experiment and try things, and that doesn't work, because that's where you sort of find the treasures and the brilliance is through these mistakes or these little nuances. And we were constantly talking, and he would be giving input thoughts. Like I loved at one point we talked about Volpe, one of the characters, having coins and change in his pocket. And I love, and tap shoes. The tap shoes, brilliant. So now
the tap shoes became a point of interest.
That shows actually how complex this is, because even with the tap shoes, we did the tap shoes and we did toe taps. He says, that's not right. We did heel toe. No, that's not right. And we went through iterations and we couldn't get it. And then, to be honest, we went through the whole picture. At the very end, he shows me this 1930s, 1940s thing of this guy up and down the stairs. And he showed it to me. I said, but we don't have that rhythm. He said, I don't care about sync. And all of a sudden, now I understood why we weren't connecting. He was looking for the rhythm. I was looking for the...
Because you don't listen, Scott.
Oh, jeez.
You produce sound, but you don't listen to it. No, we have, I tell you, the thing with Scott that is great is we have, of course, a well-worn, long-time partnership, and that's great. But what I find is Scott never ever gives up. So we found the tap shoes quite literally after we finished the mix. We came back and patched it. But what I admire about Scott is once he understood it, once I was able to explain it in clear terms, not because it's my second language, but because the fact is he cares about sync, I care about emotion. Everything went really, really fast. You went back that night and recorded them, yeah?
You're saying you actually went back after the mix was done?
Yeah. Yeah, because the thing is, it's got to be right. We work so hard. I mean, I'm such a fan of the visuals and of what the movie was. There's no way I feel that I could give up and not be correct. And the hard part with sound is words are hard to describe a sound. I make a lot of sounds with my mouth, and so does Guillermo, and we sometimes communicate that way. But when he saw it, and he said, "Oh, you wanted rhythm." I know. So you wanted rhythm. I said, "Oh, we found the dancer," because I had a dancer before, but I wasn't thinking like get. So now we're doing rhythms, and we made the sync work enough where the audience wouldn't tell. But all of a sudden, it was about the rhythm, and that's where I said, found the dancer, put it in. It was great. We had it in the next day. I said, Guillermo needs to come back. I said, he's busy. I said, no. I texted him. I said, I got this. Comes in, loves it. What about the other two scenes? Had it. Boom, boom, boom. 15 minutes.
We actually made the last adjustment to the mix after the London premiere.
That's amazing. So I know the film was in development for a long, long, long time, and it went through a lot of iterations. And so, Guillermo, I was just curious, was it always intended as a musical? Was that part of the DNA of
it? Was even when Gris was directing, and the tenets of the screenplay that was co-written by me and Matthew Robbins, the tenets were the same principles and ideas, but it was very differently organized. Even back then, it was a musical. But we wanted to show that it was not a regular musical, and I think the key moment is, wouldn't you say, Mark, when we crushed the cricket?
Yes, because we had just come out of a song, and not too long ago, and then it feels like we're going right back into a song. So it feels like the audience is saying, "Oh, I see what's going on here," and then we say, "Nope, that's not what's going on here. This is not the movie you expect. We crush the cricket. He's not going to be delivering wisdom to Pinocchio. We're not going to burst into song every few minutes. That's not what this movie is."
And I think, Glenn, the thing is, because people have so ingrained the songs of the Walt Disney Pinocchio, they expect, it's very jarring that somebody is now trying to do a musical. So that is the perfect antidote, is to crush the cricket and show we are not the usual musical. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up Sebastian J Cricket, who is a character, and really, you guys just beat the hell out of him in this film. It's really unconscionable what you do.
That comes from the book. In the book, the cricket gets crushed and crushed and crushed. And I kind of like that. I never, ever stopped, and you know this. Every time the cricket get crushed, I laughed.
Yeah.
The entire mix, and then every time I would go.
But was he fish bait in the book also?
No, I don't think so.
Exactly.
Guillermo, I've always known that you had a dark side, but this is taking it to a whole nother
Russian
level.
cricket.
Can you talk a little bit about developing the songs and working with Alexander Desplat on the songs?
Patrick McHale, Mark, and I were in Paris, and I had successfully written the lullaby, My Son, and it went to my head immediately, and I thought I was Paul Williams. And then Mark, Pat, and I...
Are you talking about Ciao Papa?
No, My Son, the one that Geppetto sings.
No, My Son. The one.
Oh, yes.
And I thought I was, a master songwriter now. And Mark, Pat, and I were sitting around the piano with Alexander, and I was soon informed in front of them that I was no genius lyricist.
We caught Guillermo busking in the street. And we said, no, this is not going to work.
But what I did is Pat and I laid the basics of the songs, the theme, the sort of ideas that needed to be on the song. Then I did another pass. And then, Alexander and his lyricist friend, Kat, they came in and organized everything beautifully and made them be songs.
They're gorgeous. John, can you talk a little bit about mixing the songs?
Well, first of all, I mean, when you have Desplat's music under your fingers, you take things very seriously all of a sudden. And that's true. All the different scores I've mixed of his, everything he does is so precise and so beautiful. And the mixers that he has mixing for him do such a phenomenal job that there is a real sense of responsibility that happens, and it gets to a point where yes, everything's set up a perfect way. It's set up exactly where it should be, but this is a film and you still have to look at the overall film. There's never, ever any one aspect other than the whole film and support. And so nothing is safe, especially with Guillermo when he's trying to look for a very precise type of emotion. And I'll say this because it always shocked me at first, but we got to this scene where there's an accordion solo in the middle of Mio Papa. And Guillermo says, oh, that's great. Get rid of the accordion right there. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I'm like, get rid of the accordion? He goes, no, we don't need it. I'm like, what do you mean we don't need it? And it's to clear something else that's more important at that point. It was the newspaper of Mussolini. And then, so what we ended up doing was playing the first part of the phrase with the accordion and then go right into the strings after that completed the phrase and was very, very musical still. And that's just the reality, regardless of how great the music is. It's how do you make the film as good as it could be? And with great directors, and this is very true, they never think about any one aspect. It's just how do you get that emotional the value of the emotion across. What is the way to do that? And nothing is sacred ever, and that's very important to remember.
It's funny, but I think the last time you write the movie, you write it in the mixing stage. It's the last time you have to structure a scene. It's not a mix of sound. It's a structure of scene. And if you are not listening to the rhythms and what you need, nobody wins. I mean, the great thing is Scott came in with 150 sounds and, you could end up with 15. It doesn't matter. There's no ego. And Alexander's music got moved 24, 48, 72 frames to the right, later. And it's because it worked better there. And everybody was terrified in the mixing room. And I said, blame it on me. I'll talk to this I'll go, I don't know. I can always act drunk. I don't know.
But it's true. Nothing's sacred. It's whatever makes it work. You talk about structure of the scene. And the other thing is, Guillermo, the structure of the film. And I'm a very dynamic mixer. I believe in dynamics. I believe when somebody's coming at you, you want to know they're coming at you. And I would say Guillermo's the first time ever that somebody said, no, he's got to come at me a little bit more than that. And I'm like, whoa, okay, awesome. Not scared of it. Bring it. Let's have it. I want the audience to know. I don't want them to guess. I want them to know that this is a moment, a perilous moment, through dialogue. It's like, okay, you got it. Absolutely.
And it's one thing I've done a number of films with Guillermo. And one thing I've noticed, especially near usually the second or third playback for most people are, hey, I just want to hear it one more time. Good, I love it. They walk out. And I think we get it to a point where they sometimes see Guillermo go, okay, now, this is where we're at. Now, here's what I want to do. Let's drop this. Let's move this. And it's just extra little fine sculpting on the way a scene plays out and the rhythm of it. And in every film, you're not out of indecision, but just how do I get that extra little tweak?
I think a mix is like picking up your room when you're in high school. The more you pick up, the more you find. All of a sudden, you were picking up your clothes and now you're finding the pizza box from 2 months ago under the bed. And I think a lot of people just want it to be neat. And I think then we want it to be organized. And Mark and I would at the drop of a hat would do a little special sound of like the bubbles that sound like farts in the interior of the fish. That's Mark and I. And by the way, it's simulating
Mostly
it.
you, Guillermo.
You know, yeah. But we fortunately, at this point in the mix, Mark and I were mind meld, and our notes were really similar. And when they were not, we knew the other one was listening to something that was completely right. So there was no question. We tried everything.
Mark, is it usual for you to be that involved during the sound mix and the post? You usually take the projects all the way through?
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, in this case, Guillermo has so much more experience doing this particular style of mix that, you know, I learned a great deal from him. It was a fantastic experience. Oops. Wow.
Mark,
I can still
Mark,
hear you.
I think
is
Guillermo
very
turned your light
dramatic.
off.
Yeah, so as I said, you know, I learned a great deal just you know, watching Guillermo work on this sort of thing. I mean, we had things like that interior of the dogfish was a really interesting challenge, and because it had to be a space that you didn't want to be in, but at the same time was interesting because you wanted to understand why the characters would want to get out of there. So it had to be unpleasant, but it also had to be kind of interesting. So, you know, we got Guillermo turned out to be the best at doing fart noises and bubbles bursting. I was shocked at his proclivity. He was very, very good at it, almost too good.
It's the thing I was born to play. I can't play the piano. I can't play the flute, but there we go. No, but the flatulo.
Well, Mark, I'm glad you brought that up because I really wanted to ask you guys about the sound inside the whale and just that whole sequence and escaping the whale. That is such a tour de force for the soundtrack. And Scott and Frank and John, please deconstruct a little bit of that for us and how you approach that sequence.
Some of it are, I did some recordings inside the body, actually, to try to get, like, especially the stomach, the gurgling, and to try to give it that kind of...
What do you mean you did recordings inside the body?
You can use certain microphones that are like bands that I've done that over time where you can... It's like when you feel like a baby, you know, when you listen to the baby's heartbeat and all that, there's microphones, transducers you could put over your stomach and you can hear your body.
But Scott, whose stomach?
My wife's.
All right, that's what I wanted you to say.
Anyway, so there's a lot of internal sounds that way. I actually vocalized a lot of the internal, trying to create the dogfish outside, inside. So I used to manipulate my voice to grunt. I used so many different sounds and slowed them down to like slow water and movements, kind of give a gurgling. And this too, we did dripping. We did a bell buoy because we figured he swallowed a whole bunch of things. So at times you'll hear like a little buoy in there.
We, for example, decided that when he blows his horns, they should sound like the horns on a foghorn. They should sound mechanical rather than just animal. And the decisions inside, because you have so much low frequency, it's very easy for it to become noise once the music comes in. So what I think is the decisions on a mix like this have to be bold and immediate, and you just say out, 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 in. It's like a tango. Somebody needs to be leading. When you're mixing a sequence like that, you have to say sound leads or music leads. Or, you know, you cannot, or you fluctuate, but you have a design in mind. You cannot try for them to have a truce. It's an all-out war between sound and music. So, you know, you say music leads, sound punctuates. That's one way of mixing, or the opposite. Like, I think the hardest mix we ever had was Pacific Rim, when you had 250-foot robots fighting 250-foot monsters and a score. And you had to say, okay, here the score goes away, or here the sound leads.
Through the whole movie, I'd say, even with Dogfish, there'd be a beautiful little musical phrase, and we wanted to really protect that. But then there would be something after that phrase, and all of a sudden be like, da 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 da, and then. So there was always, like, a tango is a great word. So the music would say something, I would answer something. And then we've been back and forth consistently.
And you have the problem. The big fight in a mix is for the mid ground, for the mids, and because a lot of the musical instruments are gonna become noise in the mid, and a lot of the sound design is gonna agglomerate into a sort of a hum if you're not careful. So it's about what is one of the things I would do with Frank. I would say to Frank, play me every single track and call them. Track 1, track B, track A, B, C, whatever you want. And then we would say out, 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 in. Or we would drop with John an instrument or two,
Because a lot of times going into the mix, I don't know what the music's doing at that point. So I have to come with all the tools available at different frequencies. So then we do go to the mix. It's easy for us to take things out. It's hard and crazy to put stuff in after the fact. So like come in well prepared.
And it has to be, as a director, if you were on the recording of the orchestra and for example, if the oboes were recorded separately, we can drop that. Or they did the timpani separate, let's drop the timpani, et cetera, et cetera.
And one good thing that Desplat does is he always makes sure that you have the low end all the way through. The low end's always there, covering every beat. So if the mid-range gets too mushy, you can actually lose, the percussions, all the mid-range percussions and stuff, and just rely on the low end, just the bass to give you that rhythm. So you never lose that sensation. And that's an experienced composer putting that down.
One thing that Guillermo and I spoke about even early on, especially with Dogfish, if we have sustains, like Guillermo was saying, like the mid-range sustains, it's very easy to get mush. But like with the blops and the things that go, boop, sounds that come and go really quick, can percolate inside and outside of the music in ways that can be heard without overpowering or taking over something.
One of the sequences that I particularly love, and Guillermo, I think it was just and Mark, such genius to come up with this idea of Pinocchio's afterlife experience. I love the processing area, which sonically is such a rich environment. Can you tell us a little bit about the sound design of processing and what's going on in that space and how you design?
Yeah. So, early on, I had that, and I was trying to create something otherworldly, godly, and I just wanted to throw something out there because I was working on that scene. And it's a combination of pitch changes of voices, doing some echoes, reverse sounds going in. The sisters were actually not the same processing, similar but different, because I wanted them to be different but feel like they're part of the same spiritual family. So I wanted to make it where it was coming through all the speakers. So when they spoke, especially with Death spoke, it was everywhere. It was all encompassing. And at that point, was it something you sonically heard, or was it something you just knew, whether it's telepathic or I just wanted to make it feel like grand. So you had Pinocchio being small, and here's this voice, this all-knowing voice. And it was just a feel thing. I experimented with it a little bit. I sent it out for Mark and Guillermo to hear, I think early on, and I think everyone sort of liked it. Always the challenge when doing anything like that is to make sure you can hear all the words. And that was always a delicate balance that we did the best we could. And then John even did some tweaks as well.
One of the things this movie required was you needed to start the mix very much in the sort of like a proscenium, only on the screen, using very little surrounds until reel 3. We wanted the first couple of reels to not feel like you were mixing a live action movie with using the surrounds and the sort of fishbowl mix approach where you're immersed. That was a very clear instruction when I heard the first premix. I said, get rid of all the surrounds for the first 3 reels because you need the scale of the mix to be the size of the puppets. You don't want the mix to sound bigger than the animation. And then little by little, and I think the culmination of the full fishbowl starts with death. When he goes to the other side, then now you are all in limbo. Everybody in the theater is surrounded. And then we could do that with the dogfish, et cetera, et cetera.
I think it was also important that the sequence with the rabbits was sort of mundane, and it had to feel like these guys were just going about their business to really contrast the next room that he went into. So I think that was an important thing for us to do.
When Guillermo came up with the idea about the puppet show at the beginning and we went mono to ending up in Atmos, I have to admit, I thought it was the most brilliant thing that we had done because, as there's a lot of stuff we do in design, but very rarely do you see a mix really evolve from the story. It's not as common these days. And to sit there and say, as the show evolves, so does the spatial side of the mix. To be honest, I thought it was brilliant.
But I think that the wisdom of the decisions of keeping everything to a minimum in the beginning was there even from the early discussions. We spotted, Mark and I spotted with Scott in LA. And when we were spotting, I don't know if you recall that, Mark, we were saying we should keep it small on all the beginning in terms of design elements.
So Frank, can you tell us a little bit about that as a design idea, and then once we get to that sequence with death, you were really able to open things up?
Well, the movie starts off in mono from the very first frame of picture, first frame of sound, was just to keep it tight and then open it up as it goes. So it was just by chance that we were kind of headed that way, and Guillermo had it in his mind and spoke about it more and more, and we pared it down more and more. But just by chance, just the image, and it starts off with the acorn, and from black to acorn, I had everything tight, and then kind of blossomed out a little wider and a little wider, and we were just harmoniously on the same page. It was strictly by accident on my part. And working with Guillermo and Mark, it was fantastic. Just the evolution of sound. There was nothing that we didn't just buy it for the sake of time. It had to mean something. It had to work. It had to be part of the storytelling, part of the characters through the film. So with Guillermo's ideas and focus and stuff, you learn a lot, even though you've been doing it for quite a while. But it was just it was a pleasure just to kind of, again, just focus on different things and get different feels all the way down to the dogfish and the most dynamic parts. It was just a lot of fun, and the film is fantastic, and it's well done all around.
Mark and I had to fight for the time that we needed on the mix board. Originally, because, animated movie, they gave us a number of weeks, and we said, no, we need more. And we fought for more. Scott and I knew that our timing generally takes a little longer. But I think that we ended up understanding that we needed as many passes as a live action movie, a big one, to reach a simplicity, which is very, very, very at odds. To be simple, we needed to elaborate the mix and make sure we were not mixing something superficial.
Well, you certainly did that. It's a fantastic track. There's another sequence that I really loved, which is when Pinocchio goes off and joins Count Volpe. I love the performing for Il Duce sequence from a sound perspective. That was one of my favorite moments in the film. Guillermo, to your point, there's a lot going on in that sequence from a sound perspective, but it's very specific and very simple in a way. Guys, can you, Scott and John and Frank, can you talk us through mixing that particular sequence and putting it together?
Well, it's funny that's actually in my head right now. That's so bizarre. But the reason it's in my head, because we're talking about simplicity. When I first played that for Guillermo and Mark, Guillermo said, it's too big. This is just a little sideshow in a tent. What are you doing? So it was really a thing of like, let's be more real. So nobody is taken out of the film from the bigness of it when this is just a couple
We went rinky dink.
Rinky dink. Yeah, exactly. Because it is about, I mean, certainly it's about the lyrics, but it's also about the showmanship and all that stuff. So it's how much do you get away with before it's just overblown and not believable. And that was a really good moment, because that was the very first time. And Guillermo said, yeah, rein it in. Don't do that. And it's like, oh, you got it. And so it was kind of made sense. You know, you're starting to understand the film as you go forward. And of course, it all becomes, you know, threaded together from start to finish.
And this is where I got really medieval with the score. Yeah, oh yeah. It was John was thinking a French passport was getting sealed with an assassin sent by this plan. Because Alexander had made that he had chorus, female voices. It became very pop, pa 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 pa, you know, and I just said out, and John was like a cartoon, biting his fingernails, flying everywhere, you know. Like, but it was because it felt like a decision by a composer and a director trying to impress. And I think we took a quick side meeting, Mark and I said, are you with me or are you, no, I think we took a quick side meeting and we agreed.
Yeah, absolutely.
We would be cruel to the Frenchmen. And I think that everybody was hoping he would come after me, but everybody agreed, let's do it.
Guillermo, you had a perfect out, because you could just say, well, it was all Mark's decision. He's sitting right there.
Yeah. No, but I think it's important to say this, because sometimes Alexander is very daunting as a composer. He is so thoughtful and so elaborately beautiful what he does. And I just say, you know, at the end of the day, that happens in every aspect of designing a movie. And you should not care about somebody's feelings. You should care about the result, because then everybody is happy.
But it's really hard because he's made this beautiful confection, you know, and on its own, it's just, you fall in love, and then you have to fall out of love, because you have to serve the story and the film. And that's really hard and unpleasant.
I love the character of Spazzatura. Scott, can you talk to me about your design for, you made that monkey very, very, very expressive.
You know what? I would love to take the credit. It's Kate. I was blown away. I had early recordings, and then I started joining the ADR sessions, and we started recording Kate again. Wow. I mean, she's amazing.
She asked Glenn, the one thing she said is, I don't want to do a sampler, because normally a character like Spazzatura, you have a sampler. Happy monkey, sad monkey, blah, blah, blah. And she said, I want to do the ADR shot by shot. And she often would say, what is the monkey saying?
Of course, I can't let you guys go without asking you. You're on the Dolby podcast. For everybody at home who has a Dolby Atmos sound system and is watching the film streaming in Atmos on Netflix, what are some great Atmos moments for them to listen to?
Right off the bat, I mean, when the planes come over, when he's on the swing, is so beautiful, and the music all the way through just has moments of Atmos that really just open up the theater to give you room, you know, for all of the detail that Scott has added throughout. But right off the beginning, you get pleasantries.
You know, the re-education camp, Dogfish. There's so many areas that we went subtle. We didn't go gimmicky. Any of the stuff. We made it spatial. We made it open. We made some of the rain on top, and we just did those things that just, you know, a good Atmos mix opens it up. I think that's what Guillermo and I we did Pacific Rim together for the first time. I said, "What do you think?" He goes, "Everything feels clearer, cleaner, more open, more spatial." And it's not like there's a sound here, there's a sound there. It just opens up the space a lot more. And what I love about the film is we start mono, we open it up, and we kind of end mono. we kind of end where we started, and which is amazing. Yeah.
Scott, you brought up the ending, and I got to tell you, one of my favorite things about the movie is the ending. I think most other versions of the Pinocchio story, have him becoming a real boy at the end, which has always kind of felt perverse to me because you're suddenly switching characters, and I don't know who this person is. I don't have any investment in this human character, but you took it in a very different direction, which I just loved. Guillermo and Mark, can you talk about ending the movie the way that you decided to?
It's much more beautiful to realize that he has become a real boy. Like you've watched it happen, or maybe even always was, So you don't have to change to suit someone else. You just have to figure out who you are, and either they'll accept you or they won't. And that's the beauty of the ending of this film, I think.
Yeah, I think that the lesson, if there is one to have, is that the one that changes for better is Geppetto. And he is the one that becomes a real father. That's the lesson. He was not a real father. It was so easy with Carlo. Carlo is perfect, but he becomes a real dad. There's a great moment where the cricket says, "I'm a bug, sir, but even I can teach you a few things about being a man," and he's right. And the arc is Geppetto becomes a real dad.
It's also about how we idealize memories of people. Like, I think that's what Geppetto was doing with Carlo. That's how we saw him in that first act, was this idealized vision that Geppetto had of him. And that's what that Pinocchio could never live up to.
Orson Welles used to say, "Oh, how they will love me when I'm dead."
And he was right.
He was right.
Well, Guillermo, I can't, but it was just about a year ago that you and I got to sit down together at the Vine and talk about Nightmare Alley, and you didn't say a damn word about this movie. So now I'm very curious to know what you've got up your sleeve and when we'll have a chance to sit down next time.
I can't say. But we'll meet again in a year or two.
All right. That sounds great. Gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. I really love Pinocchio. It's a great film, and I hope you guys have every success as you roll it out into the world. Thanks for coming on the Dolby podcast to talk to us about it.
Very cool.
Thank you
so much.
Bye-bye, guys.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is currently available on Netflix, where it is streaming in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. And as always, we'll have a link for you in our show notes. Many thanks again to Guillermo, Mark, Scott, Frank, and especially to John Taylor for making his second appearance on our show in 1 week. I'd like to offer my extra special thanks to our friends at Netflix who were instrumental in helping us put both of these conversations together for the show. And speaking of which, if you haven't checked out that episode on Bardo from earlier this week, the one with the other visionary, multiple Academy Award winning director from Mexico, Alejandro Iñárritu, you can find links to that and all of our episodes on all the major podcasting platforms in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, thanks again for joining us. This has been the Dolby Institute podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with production support by Taylor Hines. And our production coordinator is Sunny Chen. Thank you for listening.